Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
You can, through the sheer power of words, depending on how you manage to parlay your identity, you can really knock people around. You can get them fired. You can destroy their reputation. You can take away their political power. You can do all kinds of fun stuff from the privacy of your own home without even getting up off the couch. And I think, I think that's obviously bad, but it's also kind of understandable why this is where we are. And this whole process is inseparable from advertising right now. You saw it with Bud Light, see it with lots of other stuff. The line between advertising and propaganda has blurred away quite deliberately in many instances. And so when you run a media company and you need to have a business model, and you either do not have a subscriptions only business model or you're trying to sort of like reorient yourself in that direction, you will no doubt find yourself dependent for keeping the lights on advertising revenue. And that is the situation that Elon finds himself in. He did point out, hey, in Asia, where people don't really care as much about this stuff for demographic reasons, our ad revenues are strong. But in the West, where this is like something that gets people wound up, not so strong.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined this week by managing editor Seth Barron and editor James Poulos. Ryan is out this week, and special thank you to Seth for holding down the fort while I was gone. I was in Budapest last week experiencing the wonders of Orban's Hungary, but now I'm back here in the good old US of A, and there's much to discuss. We're going to start today with the story of Elon Musk and the Anti-Defamation League. The headline here is that Elon Musk, now CEO of Twitter/X, if you've taken to calling it that, has said that he might have to sue the Anti-Defamation League for defamation. Oh, the irony, he said. To clear our platform's name on the matter of anti-Semitism, we may have to sue the ADL. Based on what we've heard from advertisers, ADL seems to be responsible for most of our revenue loss. He's fired off a couple tweets about this, but one particularly noteworthy one I thought was this screenshot of ADL tweet saying, "Today we are joining dozens of other groups to ask advertisers to pause Twitter spending because we are profoundly concerned about anti-Semitism and hate on the platform. Here's why we're asking advertisers to hashtag stop hate for profit and hashtag stop toxic Twitter." Well, as you may imagine, this was greeted on twitter.com with many extremely level-headed and easygoing responses, including "you're doing a new genocide" and "why do you hate Jewish people?" There is kind of I don't know, this is just perfectly tailored to kind of raise all sorts of online questions. There have been a range of people in support of attacking the ADL, in part because it's become, it no longer does what it was founded to do, which is to defend Jewish people against defamation and against, prejudice and so forth, through campaigning, but also through lawfare if necessary. I mean, this organization's been around since 1913, so it's one of these kind of rights organizations that has been hijacked, commandeered in many people's interpretation, including my own, to represent basically like an organ of the Democrat Party, to become this sort of leftist attack group. And so lots of people on the right basically said, yeah, good, take it to the ADL. Lots of people also then said, like, yes, good, this is because all Jews are evil. I shouldn't say lots of people said that. There is like kind of an actual anti-Semitic contingent on Twitter, just the way that there are all sorts of like crazy contingents on Twitter. And so there was sort of a lot of hemming and hawing over, well, do we, what do we feel about the ADL? Is this a good thing? Naturally, of course, the ADL itself represented this as as a second coming of Hitlerian fascism. It's an attack on the ADL is an attack on all Jews. But there were lots of people on the right and actually just down the middle who sort of said, "No, well, actually, this is a problem." Um, my question for you guys is: do you think Musk will go through with this, and will it work? And define working, however you choose. Is this an effective way, I guess, to fight back against the capture of the ADL and similar groups?
Well, I don't know what, Elon Musk kind of says a lot of things and not, I don't really know what's in his mind, but I think it is an effective um, move on the chessboard. The ADL, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's this abusively named, or like Antifa for that matter,
Hmm,
organization that has one purpose, which is to support the DNC. It's just an arm of the DNC, the same way that CNN is, or pick your front organization. I don't think for decades now that they have not been pursuing the interests of American or world Jewry. And like Antifa, it's one of these things where the supporters can say, well, Antifa just means anti-fascist. So if you don't like Antifa, that must mean that you're pro-fascist.
yeah, or the
So
ACLU, right? We're in defense of civil liberties. Like, how
right,
can you hate
right,
us?
right. And so with this, it's like, oh, you must be pro-defamation. There was a funny tweet from Mark Lamont Hill, who actually lost his job because of his. I mean, he's an actual anti-Semite, and he's coming out saying that, accusing Elon Musk of being an anti-Semite. But here's the funny thing. It's kind of like the left always says, well, it's not anti Semitic to be against. You can be an anti Zionist without being an anti Semite,
Hmm.
right? Like they like to make that distinction, or they do make that distinction. So why can't you be against the ADL without being against Jews?
Hmm,
It seems like it's a similar type of thing. Like how can you insist that that everybody has to get behind the ADL? And again, it reminds me of like criticism of Soros. You
right.
criticize George Soros. Oh well, he's Jewish, so you're feeding into a trope about about um, Jewish control over institutions. Like, well, I mean, I'm not feeding into the trope. George Soros happens to have inhabited that.
Is embodying the trope.
Yeah,
Right, right.
he didn't have to like use $50 billion to try to become a nation wrecker. Um, anyway, I think clearly there's like a crisis of legitimation in this country, and a lot of institutions' credibility are coming under scrutiny, and there's no reason why the ADL can't as well. I mean, look, does that mean that Leo Frank was guilty? No, the ADL was right about defending Leo Frank. Were they right about promoting, the Nation of Immigrants theme starting in the 1950s? Well, like our friend Jeremy Carl said on Twitter the other day, he had an interesting thread about this. He's like, look, it made perfect sense for them at that point to espouse that perspective. Um, why we have to maintain that 70 years on is another question. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think this is sort of like the current Rorschach test, and whatever your preoccupations are, you are likely to find them somewhere in the mix or even at the top of the pile in this little episode. I do think that he is going to go forward with the lawsuit. Elon Musk does not seem, based on experience, to be the kind of guy who is going to go this far out on a limb without just going all the way. Why would he do that? I have a couple things in mind, and one of them is this. It's a reality that most Americans can't really participate in organized violence, and especially can't participate in organized violence that achieves like concrete practical results in their lives. That leads to things like Joe Biden laughing at people and saying, I have F-16s and I'll kill you if you try to like, step out of line or whatever. It leads to a lot of, sort of agita about people having guns that are effective at killing other people. But what I'm interested in right now is it also leads to a situation where the most coveted power in the country is the power to command strangers to do what you want or to not do, things that you don't want them to do, using only the power of words. And this is what happens on the internet every day is people get on there and they say, you must do or not do what I say because I am the one who's saying the magic words. And that reinforces in some cases, it's an instinct. In some cases, it's an interest. In some cases, it's kind of a ball of all those things of people in groups to try to achieve this tremendous power by saying, well, look, I represent or embody a class of victims. And so you do not have any standing to question the legitimacy or the integrity of whatever I say. And perhaps not coincidentally, one of the things that I'm saying is you must act in this way. You must not say these things. You must relinquish certain kinds of power or authority. And this is a hot game to play right now because people are kind of being pushed all in the direction of thinking like, gosh, well, in the current year, where does political power show up for me in my life? What can I do to partake of some of that power? Gosh, elections maybe don't seem as effective as they once did. Gosh, it's not 1775. You can't just like march out with your musket and like someone's playing a fife and then you're like, haha, the shot heard around the world. All that seems to kind of be over. But what you can do is you can, through the sheer power of words, depending on how you manage to parlay your identity, you can really knock people around. You can get them fired. You can destroy their reputation. You can take away their political power. You can do all kinds of fun stuff from the privacy of your own home without even getting up off the couch. And I think, that's obviously bad, but it's also kind of understandable why this is where we are. And this whole process is inseparable from advertising. You saw it with Bud Light, see it with lots of other stuff. The line between advertising and propaganda has blurred away quite deliberately in many instances. And so when you run a media company and you need to have a business model and you either do not have a subscriptions only business model or you're trying to sort of like reorient yourself in that direction, you will no doubt find yourself dependent for keeping the lights on advertising revenue. And that is the situation that Elon finds himself in. He did point out, hey, in Asia, where people don't really care as much about this stuff for demographic reasons, our ad revenues are strong. But in the West, where this is like something that gets people wound up, not so strong. Now, second, back half of where I'm thinking about these things, and then I'll wind down. Is well, what's going on in the West, such that this situation with the ADL and advertising would be such a big deal. And I think the ADL and others really want to keep the focus on the bad people who say the bad things about Jewish people. I understand why. Part of that has to do with what I just described. What I find to be of particular interest, and this doesn't really get as much attention as I think perhaps it should, considering how objectively important it is like the geopolitical situation when it comes to American and Israeli Jews. There's a lot going on here, and it's just not getting very much attention. I mean, we've seen for months on end now It's kind of simmered down a little bit, but ultimately not resolved. Profound cleavages and disagreements and conflict in Israel around Netanyahu and his court reform plan. Um, it's been years that I've heard from well-placed folks that the left is pretty much dead in Israel, and the Israelis have kind of written off American Jews as like, well, we lost them to wokeness or whatever you want to call it, and we're just going to pursue our own path. And if any of them feel the need to sort of escape from that and come back to Israel, then the door's open. But we're not going to expect very much. And so you've got these big geopolitical and ideological divides running through Israel and running through American Jews. Even here in the U.S., a lot of Jews have kind of either made their peace with wokeness or have become active participants in wokeness as a political and perhaps even spiritual project. Then you've got others who are sort of just like trying to nope out, and then you've got others who would and do locate themselves on the right, and not just the kind of squishy right, but a much harder nosed right, and one that is oftentimes quite disillusioned and disenchanted with the way that that the more waspy or white bread right has pursued its own agenda in the U.S. So there are lots of these cleavages going on right now, and I think it's just very, very difficult to make heads or tails of what's going on with the ADL debate without kind of peering under the hood of what's going on geopolitically with U.S. and Israeli Jews.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the way in which, under these conditions that you're describing, James, categories like Jewish and indeed Black or Latinx or gay or whatever get abstracted out into these like avatars of themselves, which don't actually stand for or designate the intended referent, namely like the group of people who, you know, observe the Jewish faith or are of like African ancestry or whatever, but instead stand in basically for like parcels of political views that are being elevated to a position of power, as you indicate. I mean, Seth, you were mentioning, okay, so there's this thing where you can't, you can be anti-Zionist and not anti-Jewish, but somehow you can't be anti-ADL and not be anti-Jewish, because the ADL basically, presumes to represent Jewry as a whole, or American Jewry, or whatever. And this is particularly remarkable since one of the things that the ADL is often now doing is going after Jewish people that don't toe the party line. I mean, Andrew Ross Sorkin was just interviewing Greenblatt, the head of ADL, to say, like, are you trying to basically shake down Musk for money? And Greenblatt responds, that's an anti-Semitic trope. You're kind of indulging in anti-Semitic tropes. Seth Mandel is another person that's been an object of this, Jewish people with like a variety of views, as James is indicating, coming under the fire of this like totalizing object, this blunt object, which is called like Judaism and anti-Semitism, and these words that now no longer refer to the people that they're supposed to refer to, but instead have taken on a kind of life of their own. And in that respect, it strikes me as really interesting that like the major accusation or sin that you can commit is to use a trope, to be indulging in the wrong kind of trope. Now, a trope is just exactly this sort of like broad brush caricature depiction of a group of people or kind of person. And the, core version of this that we see is like Joe Biden standing up and saying, if you're not voting for me, you ain't Black. And if you fall short somehow of this political identity, then you are stripped of your actual so-called identity, like the sort of special status that whatever demographic category you might be in is supposed to afford you. And I don't think it's an accident or unrelated that like kids in school are now rushing to identify, to categorize themselves as like any number of different kinds of gender I just recently heard from somebody that said his kid was getting teased at school for being straight, right? I mean, this stuff is actually a set of like a caste hierarchy that people are kind of rushing to enter into, climb to the top as high as they possibly can. And the organizations like the ADL, which once had noble missions, now exist almost exclusively to enforce that caste hierarchy, especially against the members of their so-called favored class or protected class who dare to challenge this whole notion of like political conformity. And they're really what these organizations exist to do ultimately is like close ranks and punish anybody who like breaks out of whatever political program they're there to enforce. So as far as I'm concerned, they've completely pissed away whatever credibility they had or right they had to, stand for the actual interests of actual Jewish people. And yeah, I hope Musk does sue them. That I have no love for them whatsoever. And if that gives comfort to like anti-Semites on the right, for whom I also have no love, it's just kind of like how the cookie crumbles. It's like whatever you do is going to be open to weaponization and manipulation by bad people. Doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you proceed, toward what you see as the good. And I think Musk is basically doing that. And this whole anybody that says like this is all kind of an attack on Jewish people, or even anybody who celebrates as an attack on Jewish people, is playing right into this whole trope, which is what it is, where people are basically like used as props for kind of like cave wall projection of these battles between these groups that like don't have the interests that they are claimed to have anymore, if they ever did.
Well, can I just add on to this?
Yeah, of
Because
course.
you and James both made some very provocative and interesting points. I mean, I think what's also behind all of this is a big transition that hasn't happened yet, but is going to happen in the Democratic Party. Um, Here's the thing: like 50% of donations to the Democrats, at least 50%, come from Jewish donors. This isn't something that they like to, bring up a lot, but it's a fact. What we're seeing in the Democratic Party now, not among the top leadership, but in the next generation, is a serious, uh, concerted effort to uh, basically, brand Israel an apartheid state. I think I've talked about this on the podcast before.
Yeah.
I mean, this is talked about a lot, um, and the up and coming members of the Democrat Party and like their staffers just take this as essentially a matter of a fact. So you've got people like Hakeem Jeffries, who's now like the number one Democrat in the House of Representatives. And his uncle is Leonard Jeffries, who, a notorious racist, black supremacist, anti-Semite. So that, I'm not saying Hakeem Jeffries is, pretty friendly to Israel, but there is like the squad certainly feels this way. Um, and a lot of what this bespeaks, and I've mentioned this before, uh, I really think that left anti-Semitism is not like in black anti-Semitism. It's not so much that they hate Jews because they're Jews; they hate Jews because they're white,
Hmm.
and they see Israel as a white nation occupying. It's like a settler colonial state like America. So essentially, what we see coming down the road in the next 10 years is they want to make Israel an apartheid state in preparation for calling America an apartheid state. They're fighting white supremacy in Israel so they can fight it here too. Um, this is like a major point of contention, I think, among the Democrats, and that's why you don't really ever hear Schumer, Nadler, Adam Schiff, any of the top Jews in the Democrat Party. They keep very quiet about this stuff. They know what's happening. So, in a way, the ADL, they used groups like the ADL to go out there and try to try to contain all of this and
Hmm.
pretend that it's all a question of Elon Musk or white supremacists. But really, the call is coming from inside the house, as it were.
Yeah, I think I'll probably, when we get to read the damn site, I will be mentioning Jeremy Carl's piece about some of this stuff in more detail. But that's a really good point, Seth, that there's a fissure, despite the apparent kind of monolithic steamroller quality of the Democrat Party, there's actually a really profound fissure going on between the generations right now, and Jews are kind of in the crosshairs. Okay, much more, I'm sure, to return to. We'll probably get updates on this whole situation down the line. But let us now speak of Enrique Tarrio. This is the leader of the Proud Boys, for those who aren't familiar, and he has just been sentenced to 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy. This is as a result of his supposed involvement in January 6th and the events of that day. Notably, Tarrio was not at January 6th. So this is exclusively for purportedly, accusedly, allegedly encouraging people to be involved in the events which would eventually turn into this Capitol riot. Much to discuss and go over here. I will just note before we dig in that another person who has not been sentenced to 22 years in prison is Ray Epps, who has been the subject of close and careful attention on the right. This is the guy who was seen whispering in people's ear on the day of at the actual Capitol, shortly before they then would tear down barriers and make their way in. This is the guy, that has been sort of suspected of involvement with the government. Ted Cruz repeatedly questioned the FBI in Congress. Was this guy a Fed? The response he got was, "I can't answer that question." Many questions not yet answered about Fed involvement on January 6th. And yet, only the latest in a long line of prosecutions and convictions here with Tarrio. I mean, 22 years is a serious sentence. Michael Knowles pointed out on Twitter, this is like more than the average prison length for rape, human trafficking, child trafficking, and murder. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of, if you thought that this kind of stuff was going to end just with Trump and with the people who were there on the day, I've got a bridge to sell you. Do you guys feel as if this represents a sea change, a turning point for people to actually like pay attention to this stuff, or am I just extremely online to even be raising it, and will it kind of vanish without a hitch?
Well, I looked at the New York Times. I always go to the New York Times comment board
Hmm.
to see what the gauge that heartbeat, and they were all just like, "I wish he'd gotten 44 years," or "Now let's go to the real ringleader, Trump." So clearly, we know from their side that they're all in favor of it. I don't know. I mean, I guess this is like a demo. This is to encourage everybody else, or to discourage everybody else, rather.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a major demonstration. Yeah, I mean, 22 years seems insane for writing texts. I mean, I haven't read exactly what he is accused of, but the fact that he wasn't there, he was in another city. I guess, okay, he was writing text saying, yes, let's take over. I don't. I mean, what was he saying? That they should invade the Capitol? Maybe he had some like screwy plan to take it over. I don't know. But it seems completely disproportionate and really insane. And yeah, I mean, I guess from what I gather, aren't they saying that this is going to go on for years? They're just going to keep rounding people up. I mean, here's the thing: if you look at the indictment against Trump, the conspiracy charge is that basically anything like there's a central crime, and that's the denial of the election. And it's funny because you can participate in the conspiracy like either backwards in time or forwards in time. So it sort of seems like you could do something now that would be participating in the conspiracy.
Hmm.
And like they say in the indictment, it all began on election night when Trump said that he won. And I think they would say it probably goes well before that. I mean, the whole thing is this crazy mirror of actually what the Democrats did in 2016 in terms of overthrowing the election, and then in 2020 when they fortified the election.
Hmm.
It's just this total projection of their own crimes. Uh, I mean, really, like Norm Eisen should be in prison, and John Podesta should be in prison, and that whole gang should be in prison for 30 or 40 years. But instead, they go and find this guy, head of the Proud Boys, which isn't really an I mean, they say Antifa isn't really an organization. Well, I think you could probably say the same thing about the Proud Boys.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like half feds at this. I mean, it's
well,
like half
yeah,
people
right.
trying to encourage people to do this stuff. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, I don't. I wouldn't recommend getting onto their radar. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, hard to know how to avoid it. As you say, this stuff is apparently kind of retroactive. And uh, what struck me most about that New York Times write up was the glee, the kind of barely concealed glee in the descriptions of Terrio's like kind of humiliation, right? And not just Terrio, but Biggs, who's Joseph Biggs, who was the actual kind of leader on the day of, right? Here's the Times. Days after weeping at his own sentencing, Mr. Biggs called into a vigil being held outside the municipal jail in Washington that houses several Jan 6 defendants, describing his punishment as insane and declaring, "We got to stand up and fight. Don't give up." I mean, weeping at his own sentencing is just an incredibly charged line. And then the Atlantic published a piece called "The Proud Boys Found Out," which is a reference to the slogan "F around and find out," which they usually, I think, often use. I mean, yeah, James was talking earlier about the impossibility or the like you might say the stigma on the notion of using like armed violence or of being capable of armed violence. And I do think that there is just a kind of example being made here. There is like not only will you be put in jail if you actually commit a crime, but if you are even like in the vicinity of something that we've decided we don't like, it just all starts to look more and more like a Reichstag fire to me. As like, okay, something bad actually did happen. And now the specter of it is enough to really taint anybody that they can associate with it. And they can basically associate anybody with it.
Yeah,
Like I mean, it's kind of Soviet in that way.
and don't forget, it wasn't armed. Nobody there had any guns. There were no guns. It was not an
Right, right.
armed insurrection, and they keep
Yeah.
calling it that. But
Yeah, because of the pole that they used, right? There was like a a flagpole that they took out of its base, and that is what is meant usually when they say armed insurrection.
Yeah, so my take on this is, I look at these sentences. I think they shock the conscience. I think they are excessive by design. But I look at the New York Times. I see lots of headlines right now on the website. I don't see any reference to any of these guys. It's a little bit surprising that that state affiliated media, as they say on Twitter, has not just been kind of having a round the clock celebration. I think people are, nervous up there in the upper echelons, and I think they have reason to be. And I think that reason doesn't have to do with the specter of dictatorial Donald seizing power and destroying America forever. I said at the beginning of all this January 6th madness on this very podcast that if you are the head of a major intelligence agency and you did not have anyone on the ground in the vicinity of the Capitol on that day, you were bad at your job and you deserve to be fired. It doesn't take a revolution. It doesn't take an insurrection. It doesn't take even, blood in the streets or garden variety civil unrest, Antifa level commotion. It doesn't take any of that stuff to create an opening for the many foreign governments that have an interest in meddling in our affairs to take advantage. And I think that if you are like a career upper echelon person in the U.S. government, and you have eyes onto all these kinds of shenanigans, not just our enemies, but adversaries, competitors, even some allies, it's a mess. And it's a mess because we've been waging this shadow war for over a decade, coming out of the failed war on terror, coming out of the failed war in Afghanistan, coming out of the rise of Five Eyes and surveillance state and all those disclosures. And it's a hard situation to keep under control. And I think we do need to be cognizant that it's not like the old days when Andrew Jackson wins in an upset and all of his hayseed supporters sort of rush into the White House and are knocking over tables trying to get the free cheese or whatever. The Federalists have to run out the back door. It's not like that anymore. This thing has a lot more layers. I think that our sitting regime sees its weaknesses in real time in a way that American citizens don't. I think that's one reason why they're so disinclined to level with us about why they do what they do, why they're so tight-lipped about so many things that seem to be unfolding, but we can't really, oh, another industrial accident, huh? How random. There's all kinds of stuff going on, and in the absence of knowledge about those things, citizens reasonably look at these kinds of sentences and freak out. But it seems to me, this is you kind of have to go with your gut on some of these things. It sure looks like, even though they're definitely willing to continue to make examples out of people, I do think that they just want it all. I think they just want the pain to go away. I think they just want to try to get back to a slightly more predictable political situation so that they can attend to the shadow war, which, whether it's you looking at what China does on our soil, anything from mafias to uh, cyber criminals, to countries stealing intelligence and secrets of state. There's a lot going on. And there are good people up at the top there who are just trying to prevent the shadow war from eating America. It's probably a really tough job. Glad it's not my job. We're probably going to have a reckoning one way or the other. Might already be underway. So it's all very bad, and it all bespeaks, I think, decades of poor governance and bad choices. Even if the fallout from January 6th ends up being tied off sooner rather than later, I think the bigger issues are here to stay for some time. It's going to be tough to clean up and tough to get the U.S. back on its feet. But eventually, someone's going to have to do it.
Yeah, in the face of all that, it's easy for me at least to feel a certain degree of like batten down the hatches ism, like just this feeling of attend to you and yours, if only because this Epps thing alone, out of so many of these developments, is so sketchy, and the stuff that is kind of most loudly peddled in the news, and then I hate to say it, also picked up in conservative media, is like such a sideshow to the developments that James is talking about, that it's difficult to feel, and I think this is a major source of despair, as if any information about the most important stuff is forthcoming, or at least any of the important information about the important stuff. And this, I think, is why you are starting to see a lot of people really investing, like checking out from politics and really investing in like homestead mentality, kind of try to shore up your own assets and prepare for whatever may come and let the world be the world. I'm very sympathetic to this. I think, a certain amount of engagement and involvement with national politics is a good, and that there are still like still and all for all of this, there are still kind of ways and opportunities to quote unquote make a difference there. But the more people turn their attention away, I think, from what they're not able to achieve or to find out about these like vast geopolitical motions, and the more they devote their personal and spiritual attention to what is within their control, the better off I think we are going to be. With that, speaking of stuff that may actually be somewhat within our control, let's talk about COVID and its putative return. Nothing makes me just personally more disquieted, more in need of spiritual consolation than when I start to see rumblings on the Twitter timeline about more lockdowns and more masks. It just goes right up my skin. There's no political issue or social issue to which I have a deeper emotional connection, and that emotional connection is primarily one of rage. And now it seems as if there's kind of a meme, at least going around on the right, that like lockdowns are coming back. This was helped along by the announcement that Jill Biden got COVID and that Biden was going to wear a mask, and that because the CDC still ludicrously recommends wearing a mask for like 10 days, I think it is, after somebody around you gets COVID. Um, but there's more to it than this. I mean, Alex Jones on August 18th did an episode of his show in which he was talking about the return of lockdowns. He said a high level manager in the TSA predicted a return to mask requirements by mid September. There have been a few news stories about like certain schools and airlines contemplating the reimposition of masks, and there's also been just like some news stories in legacy media about Dr. Fauci worrying that if there were mask requirements and lockdowns, people might not comply. And wouldn't that be terrible? This is one of those things where I feel like I could just be proven catastrophically wrong, since nothing is too absurd or shameful for the COVID regime and the COVID apparatchiks. But I'm having a hard time seeing any actual on the ground evidence for the return of COVID. It feels like this is more like more kind of anxiety casting about what might occur in the lead up to the election than a reality. And if so, that's kind of interesting of itself. But what do you guys think? Am I off here? Is there more there than I'm picking up on, or is this more a kind of specter in the air than a reality?
I sort of see it as like a giant fake out.
Huh.
Like 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 everybody on the right, their suspicions are raised. Oh, they're going to try to steal the election again, and they're going to impose another lockdown just in time. Um, I think that's like I think they're like geeking us. Like, yeah, I think they will try to steal the election. Eh, maybe they'll throw a lockdown in there, but they probably have like a deeper plan. Like, I don't think that COVID is going to work again. So, to me, it just seems like a diversion. Like, let's get the rubes like all up in arms about masks and not being able to go to the garden center. And in the meantime, we'll figure out I mean, Tucker Carlson made an interesting point. He said they're not going to use COVID again. They already did that. They're going to go to war with Russia. I mean, we're so close right now to having a full on NATO versus Russia war. They're setting the stage for it. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to, but that would certainly be a pretty tasty way to impose all kinds of restrictions, wartime restrictions. Who knows what they could do with that? And I wouldn't put it past them. Yeah, I think they've got something else up their sleeve. COVID, yeah, you know. I mean, even Biden today went up on stage and he said, like, "Oh, I'm supposed to put this mask." I mean, the guy, it's just like, I mean, it's just gaff after gaff. He's like, "I'm supposed to put this mask on, but I didn't. Don't tell them I didn't put it on."
Mhm.
Who the hell knows what he's talking about? But in a way, I think he's almost speaking to the way that people actually feel about it, which is like, not this again.
Yeah. This feels like another instance of just the longing to kind of be in the know. I mean, there's just a lot of people online and in the media who make hay out of giving that kind of wink and a nod, oh, the wake up sheeple, this is coming. And I there, as you say, Seth, there's plenty of skullduggery in the air. There's plenty of opportunities to kind of suspect something is rotten. This one, yeah, feels too simple. I will say it's certainly true that they have learned nothing and they've conceded nothing about the total uselessness of masks and the general failures and shortcomings of the vaccine. I mean, Karine Jean-Pierre was just out there saying, we know that keeping up with these vaccines work, these boosters work. Meanwhile, the first lady is like, suffering from COVID after 12 vaccinations or whatever. There's definitely like there's no sense of accountability or concession on the side of the COVID extremists. So if it were to their advantage and they felt like they could get away with it, I wouldn't put this past them. I don't see why they wouldn't. But they have other tools at their disposal, and this one is kind of played out. Like they feels to me like they're done with this toy. And so what's going on here, I think,
Right.
is like another one of these conspiracy theory situations where the the facts aren't real, but there's something being expressed. There's like a sentiment or a foreboding being expressed that's kind of
Mhm.
true. That there are going to be all kinds of shenanigans in the lead up to 2024. But yeah, I would like kind of let this one pass without freaking out too much about it. I'm speaking as much to myself as to anybody else here because this stuff does like get down right up my spine. I don't know what it is about this particular one, but I hate it. And with that, speaking of false flag operations, let's actually, this is not a false flag operation. We'll give you a true flag operation telling you to read the damn site. We have a website. It's called AmericanMind.org. If you've just been listening to us for the first time, really glad you're here, but we've got a lot more to offer. The American Mind publishes regular pieces on all and sundry items of interest relating to the right, and we like to pick one piece each week that we encourage people particularly to pay attention to. I get a special pass because I've been out for a week, so I get 2 weeks worth of content to refer to, and I'm going to take advantage of that and commend to you Jeremy Carl's piece "Cracks in the Rainbow." I mentioned this to you guys earlier when we were talking about the ADL, and Seth was mentioning the kind of intra-party squabbles of the Democrat Party and the left. Jeremy follows this stuff with great attention and precision, and he writes in this piece a pretty short but I think very penetrating analysis of some of the demographic fissures that are going to obtain as the older generation at last shuffles off the stage and relinquishes power. Um, One of the questions Jeremy raises is whether whether essentially white people are going to find that much in the uh, party to stick around for white Jews, but white just affluent whites in general. And if they do depart, what will that do to the donor base? There's all sorts of questions kind of brewing in the air that might make you uncomfortable if you are a party leader or a kind of major Democrat donor. I'll just read a couple of a couple paragraphs of this that relate to what we were just talking about. He writes, "The base of the Democratic Party is moving strongly away from Israel in contrast to most of their politicians. 11% more Democrats, 49 to 38, side with the Palestinians in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to Gallup. This is a very recent development, the effects of which have not been priced into our electoral politics. As late as 2016, in the early days of the Great Awakening, Democrats preferred the Israelis to the Palestinians by a margin of more than 30%. Add to this viewpoint transformation several statements verging on outright anti-Semitism from members and allies of the Squad, a group of minority progressive lawmakers with large amounts of public clout on the left, and many Jews may eventually be heading for the exits." That's just a taste. Lots of other stuff, not only relating to the Jewish wing of the party, but to a number of different kind of factions and demographics. Cracks in the Rainbow. Go check it out. Seth, what do you got?
I really enjoy a piece that we posted this week, and it's a two-parter. I'm not sure yet when we're going to post the next part. It's called "Between Suicide and Murder" by Giles Hoffman. He's an intrepid. He's our version of a foreign correspondent, I guess, a Canadian. He uh, he did a he wrote a piece for us last year or earlier this year about his adventures in Iraq, going to Mosul, meeting with Al Qaeda types or ISIS recruiters, I think. Well, we sent him down to the southern border, and he has produced a really startling and some fresh reporting on scene from Texas and Mexico. Like he went back and forth He talked to cartel people. He talked to ranchers. He talked to people like migrants. It's a really interesting piece. I think I haven't read anything else like it, honestly. And he's got some pretty hard observations about America and Mexico that I think everyone will find worth reading. So, Between Suicide and Murder by Giles Hoffman.
Oh, right. I think the feds got to James. They heard that he was exposing them, and they have all sorts of powers, including a legion of tech demons that can interfere in a connection at any time, at will. Thousands at their bidding, speed and post Orland and Ocean, without rest. So we will take a pass on James for Read the Damn Site, but you should still go and read the damn site. And with that, we want to thank you very much for listening to the podcast. If you want to learn more about our work at Claremont, you can visit claremont.org. If you want to donate to support what we do, you can visit claremont.org/donate. We always enthusiastically appreciate donations in defense of our work, in support of our work, defending the American idea. And you should definitely check out ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where you will find our sister publication, the CRB, the Claremont Review of Books. We've just put up a new issue. It's the summer 2023 issue. I've said this before, but this is a particularly good one, in my opinion. Lots of excellent stuff. Check out Aldous Felinas on T.S. Eliot. Check out Christopher Flannery on James Garfield. Check out me, if you like, on the Quantum Revolution. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and you should go subscribe if you have not already. And with that, thank you so much for listening. Please share the podcast. Please give us 5 stars if you feel like it. And if you don't feel like it, please just keep your bad opinions to yourself. It really helps when you subscribe, when you share the show, when you give us a 5-star rating. All of that is extremely helpful for us. And you can do that basically on any platform where you are currently listening to my voice. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zeppieri, and thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.